So ever since generative AI came on the scene, like OpenAI's ChatGPT or Google's Gemini now, there's been a lot of talk around what is AI, how does it compare with us, what does it mean for us, is it going to replace our jobs, things like this. Okay, I get those conversations. But there's something else I think we need to be talking about. I posit to you that not only is generative AI intelligence, but it is a higher level of intelligence that you or I use in our day-to-day lives. In other words, yeah, generative AI is smarter than we are, for the most part. To make my case, I'd like to look at generative AI through the lens of Bloom's taxonomy. Now, if you're not familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, it's a framework that we in education use to kind of categorize and tier different levels of learning from simple to increasing complexity. The first tier or level of Bloom's taxonomy is remembering, the ability to recall facts or basic information. Now, when it comes to generative AI, it clearly has the ability to recall facts and information. You ask it anything, it can give you an answer. So we're good there. The second level of Bloom's is understanding. This is the ability to explain ideas or concepts. Once again, generative AI is great for this. You ask it a question, ask it to explain something, and lo and behold, an explanation pops up. The third level is applying. This is the ability to take this information, the facts, knowledge, and understanding, and apply it to a problem, to problem solve, if you will. And again, generative AI is able to problem solve. You can ask it how to approach a problem, and it can give you a variety of solutions and help you kind of figure out how best to approach a dilemma. The fourth level is analyzing, the ability to take an idea or an argument and break it down into its constituent parts and consider the relationship of these parts. Once again, AI, generative AI, it can go ahead and analyze an argument, an essay, you name it. You pump it in there, ask for an analysis based on this, that, or the other, and it'll give you something pretty tremendous. The fifth level is evaluating. This is when you judge the importance or value of different ideas when you are, say, developing an argument. Now, in terms of generative AI, I use AI all the time to help me think through and evaluate different aspects of an argument. If I'm trying to teach a concept or a principle and I'm figuring out how best to approach it, AI can help me evaluate my different approaches. Finally, we have creating. This is the ability to generate something that did not previously exist. And yeah, AI can do this. Generative AI can look at a prompt, create a picture of a panda eating an Imperial starfighter, and lo and behold, the picture appears. And that picture did not exist moments before. Generative AI created the picture. Now, you might say, well, okay, but in the case of the picture, AI is going out there and looking at other pieces of art from other artists, real artists, human artists, right? And kind of pulling together something new, something it created based on what it saw from other artists. Well, yeah, this is how students learn art. In fact, there's many paintings that not all experts agree were painted by, say, Leonardo da Vinci. They're like, well, let's see, Leonardo had a lot of students with him in Milan, so this could be a Leonardo work or it could be from somebody else. We're not absolutely certain. Well, that's because this is how we learn. We mimic and imitate until we develop our own styles. And I don't know about you, but when I look at AI art, I almost see a style. Now, I'm not going to give it credit for developing a distinct style that speaks to who it is or anything, but I can tell AI art, or at least I can right now, Check back with me in a month. So, does this mean that in light of Bloom's taxonomy, AI is as smart, if not smarter than we are? Not necessarily. So, in some models of Bloom's, we swap out creating for synthesizing. Now, synthesizing is a different beast. When we synthesize something, we are combining disparate elements and combining them in such a way as to create a new whole, a new piece of information, a new understanding, a new whatever. So it's more than just creating. It is synthesizing. Now, to be sure, I can use generative AI to analyze and evaluate different ideas as I go about the process of synthesizing a new piece of knowledge or a new whole or something of that nature. But when it comes to doing the actual intellectual synthesis, that's all me. Now, okay, you might be thinking to yourself, all right, I get what you're saying, Lon, but let's not forget that generative AI is really just using large language models to do all these things that you've said. In other words, it is using existing knowledge and information that human intelligence has already generated. Okay, I get that, but let me offer this thought. Back between 1978 and 1995, someone who the world would come to know as the Unibomber was mailing or placing bombs in the post boxes or whatever of people in academia and business leaders. And this resulted in 3 deaths and, close to 24 injuries. In 1995, the New York Times and the Washington Post, they each published the Unibomber's manifesto, this person's edict to the world. The idea behind publishing this manifesto is they thought, well, maybe somebody will recognize something in the writing, and that could potentially give us a suspect. So a philosophy professor named Linda Patrick, she comes across this manifesto, and she looks at it and goes, wow, this sounds an awful lot like what my husband's brother says in his letters to us. Now, her husband was David Kaczynski. That's right, the younger brother of Ted Kaczynski. Now, at first, as you can well imagine, the younger brother, David Kaczynski, he's resistant to this idea, but then when he looks at the manifesto himself, he's like, this sounds just like my brother. And it was. In other words, when writing letters to his family and when writing his manifesto, Ted Kaczynski was drawing off of the same large language model, a large language model in his head. I assert that we all use large language models in our heads. These are large language models that were input by our parents and our teachers and our religious leaders, our political leaders, our cultures, and our communities. You name it. We have all kinds of thoughts, opinions, ideas, and beliefs that have been basically planted in us, which we have synthesized into our own selves, I agree. But these are large language models that have been created and implanted input from other groups and individuals. So now consider this. The large language model that generative AI follows is ginormous. It is infinitely larger than anything that I am working off of. My large language model has been developed over, I think I'm 58 years old now, so 58 years, and is contained in the 6-pound organ right here. That is the extent of my large language model. Whereas generative AI has a large language model that includes all of human history, all of recorded human history and research and knowledge and interaction and so forth, and is contained on billions of, what's the word? Billions and billions? Exabytes, that's the word. billions of exabytes of information in the large language model accessed by generative AI, whereas all I got is this thing. Furthermore, all of us, to some degree or another, live in our own little echo chambers. We read and we watch and we associate with ideas and beliefs and thought structures that really we agree with. We don't have all that much exposure to beliefs and opinions and thoughts that run counter to our own. This means that every single day, our own large language model, well, it's being reinforced constantly. And if that's not bad enough, our own individual large language models, which are pretty darn finite, as we've discussed, they become even smaller when we are emotionally or ideologically triggered. When we come across an idea or a thought or a dogma or axiom or an ideology that runs counter to what we hold as true and right and noble, our ability to dispassionately and rationally consider the idea, it shrinks like nobody's business. Phrases like my body, my choice, regulation stifles innovation, everyone has the right to a livable wage, drain the swamp, let the free market decide. That's fake news. Parents know best. Check your privilege. It's all just virtue signaling. I'm willing to bet that you've heard most of these phrases, and I'm also willing to bet that one or two of you kind of got your hackles up. That feeling of getting your hackles up and getting a little hot under the collar, that's the feeling of your ability to dispassionately and rationally consider an idea shrinking. Also, consider this. With the exception of the field of study, the domain in which you are an expert, AI is better than you at everything. Okay? Now, if you are a professional or highly proficient artist, you're better than AI. But if you're not a highly proficient artist, AI is better than you. Same thing goes with writing or cooking or mathematics or coding. If it's not your area of expertise, AI is smarter than you. This brings me to my last point. Folks are really fond of pointing out that generative AI is sometimes wrong. And my thought is, as opposed to us? I mean, come on. If we are going to assess intelligence on the basis of one's ability to correctly analyze fact and thought and belief and ideas and principles and so forth, and to be wrong as little as possible, then I've got news for you. Most of us are idiots. Okay? I don't know that a day goes by that I don't discover something that, frankly, I think I was wrong about. And that is part of growth. That is part of learning. That is part of self-discovery. So I sure hope that just because something is wrong doesn't mean that intelligence is not behind it. And then when we think about this, one of the things that you'll notice in generative AI is it often has a little disclaimer at the bottom saying, hey, just so you know, this may not be fully accurate. You will want to do your own research in credible sources before taking any action or something like that. When was the last time you gave that disclaimer or caveat when having a conversation with someone? Most of the time when we're talking like we know what the hell we're talking about. Like I'm doing right now, so just bear in mind, I might be totally full of shit. In conclusion, let me offer this parting thought. Alan Turing, in what became known as the Turing test, proposed that if someone were to interact with a computer and a human but didn't know which was which, and based on these interactions, the person was unable to distinguish who was the computer and who was the human, then the computer had successfully demonstrated human-like intelligence. Now, this might sound perfectly reasonable and kind of cool, and in fact, it's the idea behind the movie Ex Machina, but the truth of the matter is the Turing test failed decades and decades ago. So, no, it is not a viable consideration for the Turing test. However, there is an aspect of this worth considering. In an episode of the podcast Cautionary Tales called The Online Date That's Too Good to Be True, Tim Harford suggests that the grimy truth behind the Turing test is that it is not hard for a computer to produce conversation that seems human, because a great deal of human conversation is shallow, small talk, thoughtless, canned responses, mindless abuse, or worse. If we want to set the computers a real challenge, we need to do better. I think the same general principle can be applied to generative AI. Most of the time in our day-to-day lives, we're not really exhibiting that much intelligence. I mean, sparse little. We don't need to. We've got our routines, we've got our things, we've got our friends. We know the rules, we know our place, and it's all good. We don't need to be constantly synthesizing new ideas and new truths and so forth. However, bearing that in mind, if we continue to kind of abdicate our ability to think and rationally consider things intelligently and abdicate these things to the machines, then yeah, we're going to be replaced. So, there you go. My hot take. Thanks a lot for joining today. And until we talk again, try to have a fantastic day. And be kind to our computer overlords. Hey, hold on. I just thought of something else that demonstrates a higher level of intelligence than that created by generative AI. And that's if you support me on Patreon or the YouTube community, like these amazing folks. So all of these folks have said, hey, Lon, what you're doing is great on YouTube. We want to support you. And I appreciate it so very much. So if you want to exhibit an equal level of intelligence as these folks, then go ahead and look at the links below in the description, and we'll see you later. Thanks a lot.